Keanu Reeves thought he was walking through an ordinary school hallway until a voice rose from a dark janitor's room that stopped him cold. A voice too beautiful, too broken, too powerful to be hidden. But when Keanu opened the door, he uncovered a grief so deep it could shatter anyone, and a secret the world was never meant to hear. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Keanu Reeves arrived at the small Seattle Art and Engineering School long after most of the students had gone home. The sky outside was already dark, the air cold enough that the windows carried a faint layer of condensation. He preferred coming at this hour. Fewer people, fewer phones, fewer eyes. It allowed him to visit the programs he supported without becoming a distraction. Tonight was supposed to be simple. A quiet check-in with the faculty, a walk through the new labs his foundation helped build, and then a late drive back to his hotel. Nothing more. The hallways were almost empty when he stepped inside. The place had the familiar scent of paint, wood, and machine oil mixed with the faint trace of someone's forgotten takeout dinner. The overhead lights hummed softly, flickering every few seconds, as if reminding him that this building was old and still fighting to stay useful. His boots echoed against the polished concrete floor with every step he took, each sound stretching much farther than usual in the quiet. The ventilation system rattled somewhere behind the walls, creating a low, constant breath that filled the silence. Keanu walked slowly, hands in his jacket pockets, stopping now and then to study a project left on a table or an unfinished sketch taped to a classroom door. He liked seeing the things students worked on when they weren't trying to impress anyone. The messy drafts, the unrefined ideas, the signs of someone learning how to trust their own voice. It reminded him of his early days when he never knew whether what he was doing mattered, yet kept moving anyway. He had just passed through the engineering wing when something unfamiliar stopped him. A sound, soft at first, a note he could barely identify under the drone of the building. He paused, turning his head back toward the hallway behind him. The sound rose, again clearer this time. A voice, a strong male voice, deep, resonant, and shaped by something more than practice. It carried emotion in a way that made Keanu straighten up his steps, slowing until he stood completely still. He listened. The voice grew stronger, drifting through the narrow crack under a heavy gray door labeled Tool Room 3B. Inside that door, someone was singing unchained melody, but not in the casual, half-hearted way someone hums while working. This was different. This was a voice pouring out memories. A voice that sounded like it was holding on to something it couldn't bear to lose. It was beautiful in a way that didn't belong to this dim, industrial corner of the school. Too warm, too skilled, too full of aching tenderness. Keanu felt the air around him shift as the notes deepened and rose again. The hallway seemed to shrink, forcing him to focus on the music alone. He moved closer to the door without thinking, drawn in by the rawness of the sound. Each phrase carried a tremble, a break in the middle of a word that told a story of loss before he ever learned the man's name. It took only a few seconds for Keanu to realize that he had never heard anything like this in a place like this. He reached for the metal door handle but didn't turn it yet. He just listened. The melody swelled, the emotion rising until it felt like the whole hallway was holding its breath. That was when something tightened in Keanu's chest, a moment that told him he was hearing more than music. He was hearing a heart trying not to fall apart, and he knew he couldn't walk away from it. Keanu stood completely still, the cold metal of the door handle resting beneath his fingers, as the voice on the other side carried into a higher phrase of the song. The notes weren't perfect in a polished sense, but they were perfect in the way truth is perfect, imperfect, human, full of emotion that couldn't be rehearsed or taught. The kind of singing that came from someone who wasn't performing for applause, but remembering something he couldn't let go. For a moment, Keanu forgot where he was. The hallway, the school. The reason for his visit, all of it faded into the background as he listened. The man's voice had a weight to it, the sound of someone who had lived through years that reshaped him. Every word sounded like it was carrying the memory of a promise made and a promise kept. There was tenderness in it, but also grief, the kind that settled into a person's bones and never left. The final lines of the verse echoed through the narrow space. The voice cracked just slightly, not from lack of control, but from holding too much emotion. That crack made the song even more powerful, like a window into the man's heart. Keanu felt a chill climb up his arms, the kind he felt only in rare moments when something real reached him. He took a slow breath, adjusting his grip on the door handle. He didn't want to startle whoever was inside, he didn't want to intrude, but he also knew he couldn't leave the moment alone. There was something here, something that didn't fit the setting, something that didn't belong in a tool room at nearly 10 o'clock at night. Voices like that usually came from concert halls, church choirs, or stages lit with gold, not from behind a door surrounded by metal shelves and buckets. He pushed gently just enough to open a narrow line of sight. The room was dim lit by a single buzzing fluorescent tube near the back. The smell of cleaning chemicals drifted out, mixed with sawdust and the metallic scent of tools. And in the center of it, mopping the concrete floor with slow, steady strokes, stood a middle-aged black man in a worn janitor's uniform. He didn't see Keanu watching. His eyes were closed, his head slightly tilted back as he sang the final phrase of the chorus, holding the last note with a trembling steadiness that filled the room. His voice faded, trailing into silence. For a moment, he kept his eyes closed, as if savoring the last echo of the song. Then he opened them and froze when he noticed Keanu, standing in the doorway. The mop slipped from his hand and clattered against the wet floor. His whole expression changed from calm immersion to startled embarrassment, the kind that came from being seen in a vulnerable moment he thought belonged only to himself. He quickly wiped the back of his hand against his face, as though trying to hide any emotional trace left behind. "I'm sorry," he said, softly clearing his throat. "I forgot I was still in a school. Sometimes I get carried away." His voice, even when speaking, held the same emotional depth Keanu had heard in the song. It was warm, but tired, gentle, but weighed down by something unspoken. Keanu took a step into the room, careful not to make the man feel cornered or uncomfortable. He kept his tone calm and sincere. "You have a beautiful voice." The man looked down, shaking his head lightly, as if trying to avoid the compliment. But Keanu had already seen and heard too much to walk away now. The man avoided Keanu's eyes, bending down to pick up the mop he had dropped. His hands trembled slightly as he set it back into the bucket. He looked like someone who wasn't used to being noticed, much less praised. Keanu stepped a little closer, keeping his voice gentle so he wouldn't startle him again. He asked how long he had been singing like that. The man hesitated, unsure whether to answer, then admitted that he never trained at all. He only sang because it reminded him of someone he loved. Keanu felt the heaviness behind those words, the kind of heaviness that doesn't come from the present moment, but from the memories people carry. The man didn't offer more details, and Keanu didn't push. Instead, he let the silence say what needed to be said. The school hallway outside was still completely quiet, but in the small tool room, something powerful had just opened between two strangers. Keanu knew the sound he heard wasn't simply talent. It was grief shaped into music. It was a man holding on to something the world had no idea he was losing. And as Keanu stood there, he felt a certainty rise in him. He could not leave this man unseen. Earlier that evening, long before the voice in the tool room stopped him in his tracks, Keanu arrived quietly at the Seattle Art and Engineering School with the same modest routine he always followed. He stepped out of a plain black sedan wearing a simple jacket and jeans. No entourage, no cameras, no announcement. He preferred it that way. His purpose tonight was to check in on the scholarship program he funded years ago, a program he insisted remain anonymous so the students receiving support would never feel obligated or singled out. He wanted them to succeed because they believed in themselves, not because they felt indebted to someone they had never met. The school's dean, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Harriet Mills, greeted him at the entrance with a warm smile. She was one of the few people who knew the truth behind the funding. Together they walked through the dimly lit lobby, past bulletin boards filled with colorful artwork, upcoming project deadlines, and handwritten flyers advertising tutoring hours. The school felt alive in a way only creative spaces do, filled with ideas that never seem to sleep. Dr. Mills led him down the main hallway toward the laboratories his foundation helped build. A few faculty members tagged along carrying clipboards and tablet devices ready to show him updates on student progress. But the thing Keanu wanted most wasn't data or charts. He wanted to see the students themselves, the energy in their work, the spark in their eyes when they talked about what they were building. That was the part he could never see in reports. The school was unusually quiet tonight, quieter than any of his previous visits. Only a handful of late-night students were scattered across the classrooms. Some sketched intently on oversized drawing pads. Others hunched over digital tables illuminated by glowing screens. A few engineering students were soldering wires or adjusting robotic arms under small lamps. Their concentration was almost sacred, the kind of uninterrupted focus that only existed when the world outside had gone to sleep. Keanu paused beside a classroom window, watching a young woman shape clay on a pottery wheel. She didn't notice him. Her headphones were on, and her eyes were narrowed in that familiar look of creative intensity. Clay spun beneath her hands, while small flecks scattered across the table. Keanu smiled softly, appreciating the purity of a moment like that, the beauty of someone completely lost in their own process. These were the moments he hoped to protect by supporting the school. Not the recognition or the publicity, but the quiet chances that allowed people to grow. They continued walking. A faculty member pointed out a new 3D printer purchased with grant funds. Another explained how the scholarship helped hire tutors for students who lacked access to academic support. Keanu listened patiently, nodding, offering small thoughts where needed. He didn't like to interrupt. He didn't like to take up space. His presence was gentle, respectful, more of an observer than a guest of honor. He stepped into a computer lab where two students were animating a short film. Their screen showed a half-rendered character running through a forest. They glanced up when he entered, their eyes widening in surprise. Keanu lifted his fingers in a quiet wave and whispered encouragement before stepping back out so they could return to their work. Everything about the evening was peaceful, normal, predictable. Nothing yet indicated that he was only minutes away from hearing a voice that would change the direction of the entire night. They moved deeper into the building, leaving behind the colorful art studios and stepping into the quieter engineering wing. The air changed the moment they crossed the threshold. The faint scent of oil metal and warm machinery replaced the sweet smell of clay and paint. Rows of mechanical parts, gears, and stacked wires filled the storage shelves along the hall. Even late at night, the space felt alive, buzzing with small electronic hums and blinking indicator lights that confirmed ongoing student projects. Keanu slowed his pace, as he always did in this part of the school. He respected the students who worked here because he understood the dedication it took to stay late, to keep pushing, to believe in a future that sometimes felt out of reach. Many of the scholarship recipients came from difficult backgrounds, places where opportunities were few and expectations even fewer. He knew that feeling well. He had grown up in a world where stability was rare, and the future felt like something other people had the privilege to plan for. Supporting them wasn't charity to him. It was a reminder of the doors someone once opened for him. A faculty member guided him toward a glass-walled innovation lab. Inside, a young student adjusted a drone prototype on a metal table. The drone had mismatched parts, and a shell still held together by temporary tape, but the student's eyes focused with the intensity of someone building the first real chance of their life. Keanu watched through the glass as the student tightened a screw, stepped back, then reevaluated the entire design. He saw the frustration, the determination, and the hopeful curiosity that existed in every young inventor. Keanu tapped lightly on the glass. The student looked up startled, then smiled shyly. Keanu gave him a thumbs up. It was small, but the student straightened his posture, energized by the simple acknowledgement. Those moments were why Keanu came here in person. Seeing these sparks reminded him of how many hidden talents existed in the world, quietly waiting for someone to believe in them. Further down the hallway, the group passed an empty design studio with drafting tables and unfinished sketches pinned to the walls. Keanu stopped again, this time to study a charcoal drawing left on a stand near the door. It depicted a woman holding her child during a rainstorm. The lines were rough, but deeply emotional, drawn by someone who clearly understood fear, hope, and love. He looked at it for a long time, feeling a small ache in his chest. Art, like that, didn't come from talent alone. It came from living through something hard. Dr. Mills waited patiently before speaking. "This building is full of stories like that," she said, softly. "Some of these kids carry a lot. Your support gives them breathing room." Keanu nodded. "They're the ones doing the real work." The group continued walking, and the deeper they went into the building, the quieter it became. The sounds of creativity faded behind them until only the mechanical hum of ventilation remained. Doors were closed, lights dimmed, and the hallways felt nearly empty. It was the kind of silence that made every footstep sound too loud. Keanu didn't mind the stillness. It made the environment feel honest. Nothing was being staged for him. Nothing was being presented for approval. What he saw here was the true nightly heartbeat of the school. Calm, determined, human. Everything about the evening was unfolding exactly the way he expected, at least until he reached the corridor that would change everything. Keanu reached the far end of the engineering wing, where the lights grew dimmer and the temperature dipped a little. This part of the building wasn't meant for tours or presentations. It held supply closets, maintenance rooms, and storage spaces filled with old equipment waiting for repair. It was the kind of hallway most visitors never walked through, but Keanu didn't mind straying from the polished areas. He liked seeing every corner of the places he supported, not just the parts prepared for display. Dr. Mills apologized for the dim lighting as they walked, explaining that this section was scheduled for renovation next semester. Keanu assured her it wasn't a problem. He slowed down, studying the scuffed walls and worn-out flooring. They reminded him of the older schools he had spent time in as a kid, the ones that carried stories in every dent and scratch. He respected places that had been used fully, even if they weren't perfect. The group continued moving, but Keanu remained a few steps behind, letting the others lead while he absorbed the quiet. The hallway stretched ahead in a long, straight line, broken only by the occasional metal door labeled with numbers and faded letters. Somewhere above, a vent buzzed unevenly. The building felt old, but dependable, like someone doing their best with limited resources. That was when Keanu noticed how still everything had become. No footsteps from students, no chatter from late-night groups, no clicking keyboards or clanking tools. Just a soft, mechanical hum filling the empty space. The school felt peaceful, but almost too peaceful, like the calm before something unexpected. He took another step, hands still in his pockets. And then he heard it. A sound so faint at first that he thought he imagined it. A voice, a single note drifting from deep inside the hallway, waiting for him to find its source. The single note drifted through the hallway again, clearer this time, rising and falling with a softness that made Keanu stop where he stood. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't meant to be heard by anyone yet. It carried the unmistakable depth of someone pouring emotion into every breath. Keanu looked toward the source of the sound and saw the door to Toolroom 3B standing slightly ajar, a thin strip of warm light cutting across the floor. He walked toward it slowly, each step deliberate, as if approaching something fragile. The closer he got, the clearer the voice became. It wasn't just singing. It was storytelling, through melody filled with longing and tenderness, the kind that made the listener pause without fully understanding why. The hallway around him disappeared. There was only the voice and the raw emotion behind it. When Keanu reached the door, he hesitated for a moment. He didn't want to intrude. Whoever was inside wasn't performing. They were remembering, holding on, healing. But curiosity and concern tugged at him, urging him to see the man behind the voice. He pushed the door open just enough to look inside. The tool room was dim lit by one flickering fluorescent tube that buzzed inconsistently. Shadows stretched across metal shelves stacked with cleaning supplies, spare parts, and old equipment waiting for repair. The scent of bleach mixed with the earthy smell of damp concrete. In the middle of the room stood a middle-aged black man in a worn janitor's uniform, his back slightly hunched, his mop moving across the floor in slow practice strokes. His head was tilted back, eyes closed, as he sang with a depth that did not belong to a place like this. The man's voice carried the weight of years, the ache of memories that lived just beneath the surface. Each note trembled not from lack of skill, but from the kind of emotion that came only from loving and losing someone deeply. Keanu watched silently, feeling the impact of the voice echo through him. He had heard trained singers, brilliant performers, and artists whose voices could fill stadiums. But something about this man's singing was different. It wasn't shaped for an audience. It wasn't polished for perfection. It was honest, vulnerable. It came from the part of a person that didn't speak often because speaking hurt too much. The man held the final note longer than expected, letting it fade gently into the room. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. The entire space seemed suspended around the sound he had created. Then he exhaled a soft, weary breath and lowered his head again. When he opened his eyes, he saw Keanu standing in the doorway. The reaction was instantaneous. The man jolted, slightly startled that someone had been listening. His hand slipped and the mop clattered loudly onto the floor. Embarrassment washed over his face as he quickly bent down to pick it up. His shoulders tightened and he muttered an apology under his breath, the kind given by someone used to being unnoticed. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, keeping his eyes down. "I forgot I was still in a school. Sometimes I get carried away." His voice, even in conversation, held the same soulful depth Keanu had just heard. But now it was wrapped in shyness, as though he regretted being heard at all. Keanu stepped into the room, slowly, careful not to overwhelm him. Keanu took a few quiet steps into the tool room, letting the door ease shut behind him. The sound of the latch clicking echoed softly, but the man still didn't lift his eyes. He gripped the mop handle tightly as if it were the only thing keeping him anchored. The tension in his posture was unmistakable. He looked like someone who had been caught doing something he wasn't supposed to do, even though he hadn't done anything wrong. "You don't need to apologize," Keanu said gently. "Your voice is incredible." The man shifted uncomfortably, his shoulders rising slightly as if trying to shrink himself. He shook his head, almost dismissing the compliment before it could land. "I didn't think anyone was here," he replied. "Didn't mean to disturb anything." "You weren't disturbing anything," Keanu said. "I just wasn't expecting to hear something so powerful in a place like this." The man finally lifted his eyes, just enough to glance at Keanu before looking away again. His expression was a mix of embarrassment and surprise, as if he didn't quite believe what he was hearing. He swallowed hard, trying to regain his composure. "It's just an old habit," he murmured. "Helps pass the time." Keanu studied him for a moment. The man's face carried the story of someone who had lived through hard years, lines carved gently around the eyes, the kind that formed from equal parts laughter and sorrow. His uniform was clean, but faded, the name tag on his chest slightly scratched. Samuel. His shoes were worn from long hours of standing, and there was a quiet strength in the way he held himself even in his discomfort. The mop water beside him rippled slightly as he set the handle down. He wasn't trembling from fear, but from the vulnerability of being seen. People rarely saw janitors. They passed them, nodded, politely kept moving. But rarely did they see them. And Samuel seemed like a man who had become used to blending into the background. "What you were doing wasn't just singing," Keanu said softly. "There was something real in it." Samuel exhaled slowly, the sound full of reluctance. "I don't really sing for people," he admitted. "It just comes out sometimes when the building gets quiet." Keanu nodded. "Sometimes quiet places feel safe." Those words made Samuel pause. His fingers loosened around the mop handle. Something in his expression changed, not much, just enough to suggest that the wall he kept around himself had shifted. The silence between them grew still again, but this time it was gentle, not heavy. "I didn't mean to bother anyone," Samuel said again. though the apology sounded softer now, less defensive. "You didn't bother me," Keanu answered. "You stopped me in my tracks." Samuel let out a small, incredulous laugh, as though the idea was impossible to believe. "Me? Stopped you? You?" "Yes," Keanu replied. "Your voice did." Samuel moved a little to the side, embarrassed again, pretending to straighten the mop bucket, even though nothing needed rearranging. It was a nervous habit, a way to keep his hands busy while his emotions settled. Keanu watched him quietly, sensing there was more beneath the surface, something deeper than shyness. Something that gave that voice its heartbreaking tenderness. He just didn't know what it was yet, but he was about to find out. Samuel finally leaned the mop against the wall and rubbed his palms together, as if trying to wipe away the nerves clinging to him. Keanu stayed still, giving him space to breathe. The tool room felt smaller now, wrapped in the quiet tension of a moment neither of them had expected. Samuel lowered his eyes again, but this time he didn't look away out of embarrassment. He looked away as if gathering the courage to say something honest. "I don't usually get carried away like that," he said softly. "It happens when I'm thinking too much." Keanu nodded. "That song, it sounded like it meant something to you." Samuel's breath caught for a moment before he answered. "It was her favorite. My wife's." The words came out steady but tired, like he had spoken them too many times in his own head, but not enough out loud. "She passed a while ago. Cancer." He swallowed, forcing the ache down. "Singing helps, makes me feel like she's still close." The truth settled heavily in the small room, thick with unspoken memories. The flickering light above them buzzed once, then steadied, casting a faint glow on Samuel's face. His eyes carried the weight of someone who had loved deeply and was still learning how to exist without that love beside him. Keanu's voice softened. "I'm sorry. Losing someone like that, it changes everything." Samuel nodded once. "I didn't expect anyone to hear me tonight. I was just trying to get through the shift." "You did more than that," Keanu said. "You filled this whole hallway with something beautiful." Samuel didn't respond right away, but the faint lift of his shoulders showed that the words reached him. For the first time since Keanu entered the room, Samuel allowed himself a small breath of relief. And that was where the real connection quietly began. The small tool room felt heavier after Samuel's quiet confession. The mop water sat still in the bucket, reflecting the dim, flickering light above them. Keanu remained only a few steps away, close enough to show he was listening far enough not to intrude. Samuel leaned slightly against the metal shelf behind him, as though the story he had just shared took strength from him he didn't have to spare. Keanu kept his voice gentle. "How long have you been studying singing?" Samuel let out a soft, breathy laugh. It wasn't a laugh of amusement, but one of disbelief, the kind a person makes when the world assumes something far grander of them than the truth. He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes fixed on the floor, as if the answer embarrassed him. "I never studied anything," he said. "Not a single lesson. I wouldn't know where to start." He gave a small shrug, trying to play it off. "I just sang sometimes. That's all." Keanu took in the modesty in his tone. Most people who sang like that, even casually, had at least brushed against some form of training. But Samuel spoke as though singing wasn't something worth mentioning, not because he didn't value it, but because he saw it as something personal, private, something belonging only to the life he lived before loss rearranged everything. "What made you start?" Keanu asked softly. Samuel hesitated. His jaw tightened, not in anger, but in an effort to steady himself. He looked toward the far wall, at a stack of unused paint cans, as if the answer lived somewhere in the space between them. "My wife," he finally said. "Angela." Her name came out like something he had held in his mouth too long, kept safe, protected, but saying it now cracked open a part of him he was trying hard to keep closed. "She loved music," he continued, "all kinds, but that song, Unchained Melody, that one was her favorite." His eyes softened with the memory, even as a shadow of grief passed behind them. She said it made her feel like love could reach across anything, even distance, even time. He swallowed the movement, tight and painful. "So, I used to sing it to her, mostly at night, when the world got quiet. Just the two of us in the living room or the kitchen. Didn't matter where. I'd sing and she'd close her eyes and hold my hand like she could feel every word. He paused, but didn't look at Keanu. His gaze lingered somewhere inside the past, somewhere far from the tool room walls. She passed 6 months ago, he said. Cancer. The word hung heavy in the air. It came fast, faster than we could understand. By the time we knew what was happening, we were already running out of time. A tremor moved through his voice, small but unmistakable. He blinked slowly, fighting the dampness gathering in his eyes. He lifted a hand to rub his face, trying to hide the emotion rising inside him. After she was gone, he whispered the silence in the house was too loud, too big. So I kept singing. Not to practice, not for anyone to hear, just so I wouldn't forget how it felt when she listened. Keanu didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence between them carried more respect and understanding than any words could. Samuel breathed in shakily, bracing himself against the memory of the woman he still loved. The room felt smaller now, but warmer too, and the truth of his voice finally had a reason. Samuel took another breath, steady but fragile, the kind of breath someone takes when they're not sure if speaking will help them heal or break them further. His fingers tightened around the edge of the metal shelf beside him, grounding himself in something solid. Keanu remained quiet, watching him with a calm and patient expression, giving him room to unfold his story at his own pace. She used to say my voice relaxed her, Samuel continued, said it helped her forget the pain for a while. He looked down at his hands, turning one palm upward as if remembering how Angela used to hold it. When the treatments got harder and she started losing weight, she didn't want visitors, didn't want friends seeing her like that. But she always wanted me to sing. His voice wavered again, but he kept going. I'd come home from work and she'd be lying on the couch with a blanket over her. She'd smile and ask me to sing her something. Didn't matter what. She said the sound made her feel safe. He smiled faintly, and it was a real smile, though small and bittersweet. I never thought much about it. I didn't think I was good. I just wanted to give her something that made the pain feel lighter. He shook his head gently at the memory, the ache of it deep but tender. When she got really sick, I started singing every night, sometimes for hours. I'd sit beside the bed while she slept and just keep going. It was the only thing I had left to give her. He blinked again, slower this time, and when she died, I thought maybe I would stop, but the house got quiet, too quiet, and when I tried to stay silent with it, it felt like I was losing her all over again. Keanu stepped a little closer, his voice low and steady. So you kept singing? Samuel nodded, every night, like she was still listening. The pain behind those words sat heavy in the air, and for a moment he had to stop talking. His throat tightened, and he lowered his head, pressing his lips together as though trying to keep the grief from spilling out. The flickering fluorescent light hummed overhead, the only sound in the room as the weight of his story settled between them. I'm sorry, Samuel said quietly, though it was unclear what he was apologizing for. Maybe for talking too much, maybe for crying, maybe for exposing a part of himself he'd kept hidden from everyone. His voice softened even more. I don't share this with people. I don't want anyone feeling sorry for me. I just miss her. That's all. Keanu shook his head gently. You don't have to apologize for loving someone. Samuel lifted his gaze for a brief second, his eyes filled with raw vulnerability before he looked away again. Sometimes I feel like the only time I can breathe is when I'm singing. Not because I want to be heard, but because it reminds me I'm still here. That she was real. That we mattered. The truth in those words echoed through the small room like another note of the song he'd been singing. Keanu let the silence linger, knowing it wasn't emptiness, it was space for Samuel's heart to settle after opening itself so far. And slowly the pain behind the voice began to reveal its full shape. Samuel exhaled slowly, as though every word he had spoken had reopened a wound that never fully healed. He kept his gaze lowered, his fingers tracing the rim of the mop bucket in small, absent circles. When he finally spoke again, his voice was almost a whisper. I know it probably sounds strange, he said. A grown man singing alone in a room like this. But when I sing, it feels like she's still close enough to hear me. It's the only part of my day that doesn't feel empty. Keanu stepped closer, but gently letting his tone stay quiet and steady. No, it doesn't sound strange, and it sounds like love that doesn't end just because life changes. Samuel swallowed hard at that, emotion pressed against the surface of his composure, threatening to spill over. He lifted a hand to wipe his eyes, quickly embarrassed, but unable to hide it. His voice trembled when he answered, I didn't expect anyone to hear me tonight. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was just trying to remember what it felt like to make her smile. You weren't singing to impress, Keanu said. You were singing because your heart needed it. Samuel let out a shaky breath, the kind that carried both relief and pain. Some days the grief is loud, he said. Too loud. And when I sing it quiets down enough that I can finish the shift and go home without feeling like the walls are closing in. Keanu nodded, understanding more clearly now the depth behind every note he had heard. Samuel finally looked up, meeting Keanu's eyes with a mixture of vulnerability and tired gratitude. That's why I sing, he said softly. Not for the world, just for her. Just so I don't forget. The tool room grew quiet again after Samuel's last words, the weight of his grief settling gently into the space between them. Keanu took a slow step forward, not wanting to startle him, but wanting to close the gap just enough so his next words didn't feel distant. Samuel stood there with his shoulders slightly hunched, hands nervously rubbing together, as though unsure what to do now that he had revealed so much. The vulnerability in him was raw and real, something Keanu felt deeply. Samuel Keanu said softly, Your voice deserves to be heard by more than these walls. The words floated in the small room like something fragile, something that needed to be accepted with care. Samuel blinked at them, confused at first, as if he hadn't heard correctly. His eyebrows lifted just slightly before he shook his head, brushing the compliment aside as if it were too generous to belong to him. I appreciate that, he replied quietly, but let's be honest. I'm just a janitor. I clean floors and empty trash cans. People don't care about hearing me sing. He offered a small, forced smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. I'm not looking for anything more than getting through the day without falling apart. Keanu could see he wasn't being humble. He was being honest. He truly believed that this was all life had left for him. Not because he lacked talent or passion, but because grief had convinced him that anything beyond survival was too much to ask for. I'm not talking about fame, Keanu said. I'm not talking about stages or crowds. I'm talking about heart. He paused, letting the sincerity settle into the air. When you sing, people feel something. I felt something. Samuel shook his head again, but more gently this time. His voice dropped even lower. That's kind of you, really. But I don't think I have anything left to give the world. My wife was the one who believed in my voice. Without her, it's just a sound, nothing special. The sadness in his tone made the room feel colder, as though everything precious had been drained from him. Keanu stepped closer, not intruding, but anchoring the moment. It is special, he said, not because it's polished, not because it's perfect, but because it's real. And there aren't many things in this world more powerful than something real. Samuel forced another small smile, this one laced with resignation. You're being polite, and I appreciate that. But I'm too old for dreams, too tired for hopes. Keanu let the silence stretch for a breath. Samuel wasn't fishing for compliments. He wasn't seeking reassurance. He genuinely believed his life had already reached its ceiling, and there was nothing more to build. I'm not trying to push anything on you, Keanu said gently. But if you ever want to share your voice, even a little, even in a small way, I can help. Samuel's brows drew together, surprised by the sincerity in the offer. But after a moment, the surprise melted into something softer, something sad, but grateful. You don't have to do that, Samuel said. But thank you. Really. He assumed the conversation would end there, that Keanu would nod, offer some encouraging words, and walk away like everyone else eventually did. What Samuel didn't know was that Keanu meant every syllable. and he had no intention of disappearing. Samuel let out a slow breath, the kind that carried both gratitude and dismissal. He picked up the mop again, turning the handle in his hands, as though returning to work might erase the emotional weight of the moment. The faint hum of the fluorescent light overhead filled the silence. He cleared his throat and tried to realign himself with the familiar routines of his night shift. "You don't need to worry about me," Samuel said gently. "I'm doing fine. Or as fine as someone can be." He looked down at the damp floor, pushing the mop forward in a faint arc. "Life passed me by a long time ago. I made my peace with that." Keanu watched him for a moment, studying the quiet resignation in his voice. It wasn't bitterness, it wasn't self-pity. It was surrender, the kind that comes when a person has been carrying pain for too long. Someone who loved deeply and lost deeply enough to believe the world no longer had a place for anything bright inside him. Samuel, Keanu said, "I don't think life has passed you by." Samuel gave a tired laugh. "It's kind of you to say, but I'm almost 50. I clean rooms most people don't even notice. I sing because it keeps the loneliness away. That's all it is." Keanu stepped closer, leaning lightly against one of the shelves so he wouldn't seem imposing. "Some people live their whole lives without ever finding something they're truly meant to do," he said. "And some people find it but never get the chance to share it. You have something people should hear, something that matters." Samuel paused, mid-swipe, the mop stopping in place. He stared at the floor for a long moment before quietly shaking his head. "Even if that were true, what would I do with it?" he asked. "I don't know anything about performing, about music, about any of that world. I barely know how to get through the week. I'm not looking for dreams or miracles. I just want to keep moving without falling apart." "You don't need to know anything," Keanu said. "All you need is a voice, and you already have that." Samuel finally looked at him again, and in that fleeting moment, his expression softened in a way that suggested he felt the truth in those words, even if he couldn't accept it. But then he pulled back again, instinctively returning to the safety of modesty. "Look," he said quietly, "I appreciate your kindness. Really. But I'm not meant for the world to hear me. I'm meant for this room, this mop, this life, and that's okay." Keanu didn't argue. He didn't counter with promises or grand ideas. He simply nodded, letting Samuel feel understood rather than pressured. Kindness was most powerful when it didn't push. "I hear you," Keanu replied. "I won't overwhelm you. But I meant what I said. If you ever want help sharing your voice, even in the smallest way, the offer stands." Samuel nodded back, his expression softening with a gentle sadness. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means more than you know." He believed the moment would fade as quickly as it arrived. He believed Keanu would walk out, carry the memory of a kind conversation, and never return. He believed this night would be nothing more than a quiet chapter in an otherwise lonely routine. He had no idea how wrong he was. The room settled into a quieter rhythm, the kind that follows when two people have said all they can for the moment. Samuel dipped the mop back into the bucket and continued cleaning the floor with slow, steady movements. It was clear he wanted to shift the conversation back to something safe, something ordinary, as if returning to routine might calm the discomfort that came from being seen so deeply. Keanu didn't push him. He stood nearby, hands resting loosely at his sides, giving Samuel time to regain his footing. The emotional intensity of the last few minutes lingered, but Keanu could see the exhaustion in Samuel's eyes. Grief had carved itself into him in quiet ways, shaping his view of the world, convincing him that his only role now was to get through each day without collapsing under the memories he carried. Samuel finally broke the silence. "I'm glad you stopped to say something. Most people just pass right by. I'm used to blending into the background." "You deserve more than that," Keanu replied. Samuel gave a small, weary smile. "Maybe once. But life doesn't always give second acts." "It does," Keanu said softly. "Sometimes it just takes someone else to notice." Samuel stared at the floor, moved by the sincerity, but still convinced it wasn't meant for him. "You're kind, but I don't want you worrying about me." "I'll be fine." Keanu nodded, accepting the boundary without argument. If you ever change your mind about sharing your voice even a little, I'll be around." Samuel thanked him again, believing the moment had reached its natural end, believing Keanu would walk out and leave the memory behind. What he didn't know was that Keanu wasn't simply offering kindness. He was making a promise he fully intended to keep. 3 days passed, and the school settled into its usual rhythm. Students hurried between classes, faculty prepared their lesson plans, and the custodial staff quietly kept the building alive behind the scenes. The world had moved on in its steady way, unaware that something extraordinary had taken place in a small tool room late one night. But Samuel remembered. He remembered every word, every moment, every unexpected kindness from a man he never imagined would stop to listen to him sing. On the third evening, Samuel arrived for his shift with the same tired determination he carried most days. His uniform was neatly pressed as always, though slightly faded at the seams. He carried a broom in one hand and a small thermos of tea in the other, the drink he made every morning to help him get through long nights of cleaning. He walked down the hallway toward the engineering wing, humming softly without realizing it. The tune drifting from him was the same song he had sung in the tool room, but quieter this time, almost a whisper. There was something different about him tonight. The exhaustion was still there, but there was also a gentleness in his expression, a small hint of peace that hadn't been visible before. Maybe it came from being heard. Maybe it came from being seen. Even if he didn't believe he deserved the attention, Keanu's words had settled somewhere inside him, offering a softness he hadn't felt in months. He paused outside tool room 3B, the place where everything had changed. He leaned on the broom handle for a moment, letting the memory wash over him. He could still see the look on Keanu's face when he first stepped through the door, genuine, gentle, and moved by a voice Samuel himself had always dismissed as nothing special. He shook his head at the thought, trying not to let hope or fear creep in too deeply. He pushed the broom slowly across the hallway floor, the rhythmic motion soothing him as he worked. He hadn't expected to see Keanu again. People said kind things sometimes made kind gestures, but they moved on living their own lives. He understood that. He didn't hold it against anyone. The world was busy, and he never expected anyone to carry his story with them. That night had been meaningful, but he convinced himself it was a moment, nothing more. As he swept, he began humming again, losing himself in the sound. His voice floated gently through the quiet hallway, warm and low, filled with a private comfort he rarely allowed himself. He closed his eyes briefly and kept moving the broom in slow strokes, almost forgetting the world around him. Then a soft voice came from behind him. "Samuel." He froze. The broom slipped from his hands and clattered softly onto the floor, rolling a few inches before stopping. His heart jumped, and he turned slowly, almost afraid he had imagined the familiar voice. But he hadn't. Standing just a few feet away was Keanu Reeves holding 2 steaming cups of coffee in one hand and a small black binder tucked under his arm. Samuel blinked, stunned. "You came back?" Keanu smiled gently, the kind of smile that carried warmth rather than surprise. "I told you I meant what I said." Samuel didn't move at first. He simply stared, struggling to understand why someone like Keanu Reeves would return to find someone like him. But Keanu had never forgotten him, and he wasn't finished helping him yet. Samuel stood frozen for a moment, unable to hide the shock on his face. Keanu stepped closer, offering one of the coffees with a small tilt of his hand. The warmth of the cup drifted toward Samuel before he even touched it, a simple gesture that somehow felt larger than it was. Samuel hesitated before taking it, as though accepting kindness required a moment of preparation. "I didn't think you'd actually come back," Samuel said quietly. Keanu shrugged softly, as if returning were the most natural thing in the world. "I told you the offer was real." He held up the black binder under his arm. "And I brought something." Samuel's gaze flickered to the binder, confusion settling over him. "What's that?" "Just a little idea," Keanu replied. "Nothing overwhelming, nothing big." He shifted his weight slightly, speaking in that steady, grounded tone that always made people feel they had room to breathe. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Samuel opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. He glanced down the empty hallway as if making sure he wasn't hallucinating the moment. Then he nodded slowly. Yeah, I have time. Keanu gestured toward a nearby bench against the wall. They both sat the school quiet around them, except for the distant hum of machines in a classroom far away. Samuel held the warm cup between his palms, grounding himself with the heat. Keanu set the binder on his lap. I wanted to follow up on what we talked about the other night. I didn't want to leave it as just words. Samuel swallowed gently. You already did more than most people ever do. Just listening meant a lot. I'm glad, Keanu said. But I wasn't just listening. I was paying attention. And I kept thinking about your voice. He paused, making sure the moment didn't feel rushed. I know you said you don't sing for the world. I know that. But I also know there's something in your voice that deserves to be honored. Samuel's shoulders tensed. He rubbed his thumb slowly along the edge of the coffee cup. I'm not a performer. I don't belong in any kind of spotlight. This isn't about a spotlight, Keanu said gently. I'm not here to push you into something that feels wrong. He tapped the binder lightly. I just want to give you a chance, a small one. One step, no pressure. Samuel stared at the binder longer this time. What's in there? A simple plan, Keanu answered. A place we could go for a little while. A small recording studio I use sometimes. Nothing fancy, just a quiet space where people can be themselves. Samuel blinked at him, stunned again. You want me to record something? Only if you want to, Keanu said. No expectations, no commitments. Just a chance to see what it feels like to share your voice somewhere outside this hallway. Samuel's breathing slowed as he processed the offer. There was fear in his eyes, but also something softer, something like fragile hope pushing through months of grief. I don't know, he said. It feels big. It doesn't have to be big, Keanu replied kindly. Just honest. Just you. The sincerity in his tone didn't demand anything. It invited. And that made all the difference. Samuel leaned back slightly, holding the warm cup between his hands, the steam rising gently toward his face. He didn't drink from it yet. He was too focused on the unexpected reality sitting in front of him. Keanu Reeves had returned, not with a crowd, not with cameras, just with coffee, a binder, and an offer that felt too kind to be real. I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that, Samuel said quietly. I haven't done anything outside this building in a long time. I don't know if my heart can handle more. I understand, Keanu said. You've been carrying a lot. No one expects you to leap into anything. Samuel nodded slowly. Part of me wants to say yes, but another part is afraid. Afraid of feeling something new when I'm still trying to hold on to what I lost. Keanu's expression softened. You're not replacing anything. You're just giving yourself a moment to breathe. Sometimes taking one small step is enough to remind you you're still alive. Samuel closed his eyes for a moment. He let the warmth of the coffee seep into his palms, grounding him. When he opened them again, he looked at Keanu with a mixture of fear and trust. If I do this, it has to be small. Nothing big, nothing loud. Small is perfect, Keanu said. Just you, me, and a room where you can sing if you want to. Samuel hesitated one more breath, then gave a quiet nod. Okay, I'll go with you. A gentle relief crossed Keanu's face, not triumphant, but grateful. Samuel didn't know it yet, but this simple yes would become the first step toward a future he never believed still existed. The recording studio sat on a quiet street just outside downtown Seattle, tucked between two small office buildings that had seen better days. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't crowded. It wasn't the kind of space people associated with fame or pressure. That was exactly why Keanu chose it. It was a place where people could breathe, create, and simply be themselves. Nothing more. Samuel stepped out of the car slowly, his fingers trembling just slightly as he closed the door behind him. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, staring at the studio's simple glass entrance. the faint glow of warm lights shining from inside. The reality of where he was finally settled over him, and his breath caught for a moment. "I don't know if I can do this," he whispered. Keanu stood beside him, hands in his jacket pockets, giving him space, but not distance. "You're not performing," he said calmly. "You're just singing, just like you did the other night. Nothing has to be perfect." Samuel nodded, but the nerves didn't fade. His shoulders tensed the way they always did when fear tried to convince him he wasn't meant for anything beyond quiet hallways and mops. He took another breath, steady but shaky, and stepped toward the door, with Keanu walking quietly beside him. Inside, the front room was small, filled with soft couches, shelves of old records, and the faint scent of wood polish. A sound engineer named Tyler, a calm man in his 40s with gentle eyes, greeted them with a warm smile. He didn't ask questions. He didn't comment on Samuel's presence or Keanu's. He simply nodded in welcome and led them down a hallway toward the recording booth. The studio room was even smaller than Samuel expected. Soft lighting, a stool, a music stand, a large microphone suspended from a metal arm. Soundproof panels lined the walls, making the space feel quiet in a way that pressed into the chest. Samuel stepped in slowly, his eyes wide, overwhelmed by equipment he had only ever seen in passing. "This feels big," he said, barely above a whisper. "It's just a room," Keanu replied from behind the glass window. "Just a room where you can sing if you want to." Samuel swallowed hard. He stepped up to the microphone, hovering his hands awkwardly by his sides, as though unsure where to place them. His reflection in the glass showed a man caught between fear and hope, between the memory of his wife and the unfamiliar possibility of something new. Tyler's voice came gently through the speaker. "Take your time. No rush. Whenever you're ready, I'll start the track. And if you don't want to use the track, that's fine too. This is your space." Samuel nodded, though his throat felt tight. He took a slow breath, eyes flicking briefly toward Keanu. Keanu lifted a hand and gave a quiet thumbs up, his expression steady and reassuring. No pressure, no expectations. Samuel placed one hand lightly on his chest. For a moment he closed his eyes, allowing the silence of the room to settle into him. It felt strangely familiar, like the quiet in his house on the nights Angela would listen to him sing. He imagined her sitting in the room with him, now smiling softly the way she always did when she wanted him to keep going. When Samuel opened his eyes again, he exhaled. The fear was still there, but he had found enough calm to let the first note rise. And when he opened his mouth, the world grew still. The first note left Samuel's mouth like a fragile confession, soft and trembling as though he was afraid the sound might break if he pushed too hard. But the moment it entered the room, something subtle shifted. The microphone captured the warmth of his tone, the quiet ache hidden deep inside it. Tyler, who had been adjusting a few dial settings on the control panel, froze with his fingers midair. He turned slowly toward the glass, his eyebrows lifting in surprise. Samuel continued forcing himself gently into the melody. With each breath, the sound grew steadier, carrying the unmistakable mixture of grief and love that had lived inside him since the day Angela passed. It wasn't the voice of a man trying to impress anyone. It was the voice of a man speaking directly to the memory of someone he still loved. Keanu stood behind the glass, his body still, his eyes fixed on Samuel. He didn't interrupt. He didn't signal. He didn't move. He simply listened. He knew better than anyone that some moments needed room to breathe, and this was one of them. Samuel reached the second verse, and the trembling in his voice eased slightly, shifting into something deeper and richer. He closed his eyes, letting the music guide him through memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. In his mind, Angela was sitting in front of him, wrapped in the worn gray blanket she used on cold nights, smiling in that gentle, grateful way she always did when he sang. Tyler leaned back in his chair, slowly overwhelmed by the emotion pouring through the speakers. He had recorded dozens of artists, singers with technical skill and trained power, but none of them made him stop working the way this man did. There was a purity in Samuel's voice, a truth that could not be manufactured in any studio. The room outside the booth fell into absolute silence. Even the faint hum of the equipment seemed to soften itself so the song could take up all the space it needed. Samuel reached the familiar chorus, letting the notes swell from a place deep inside him. They carried the shape of love. They carried the weight of loss. They carried the echo of all the nights he had spent singing to keep himself from falling apart. Keanu closed his eyes. The sound was heartbreaking and beautiful in the same breath. He could feel the emotion traveling through the glass, hitting him with the same force it had the first night in the tool room. But here in this studio, Samuel's voice felt even bigger, even more honest, even more vulnerable. When Samuel reached the final lines of the song, his voice cracked, not from lack of control, but from too much truth trying to push through at once. He swallowed, trying to steady himself, but the crack remained, carrying all the love he had for Angela. His hands trembled at his sides. His breath shook as he held the final note, letting it fade gently into the thick stillness of the room. For a moment, when the note ended, Samuel didn't move. He kept his head bowed, his eyes shut tight, fighting back tears that had already begun to spill down his cheeks. Tyler didn't dare touch a single button. Keanu pressed one hand to the glass as if trying to reach him, and Samuel stood there, shaking, the truth of his heart still vibrating in the air. When the final note faded, Samuel let his shoulders fall, releasing a breath that sounded like it carried years of sadness. His hands shook as he pulled them together, rubbing his palms slowly, trying to ground himself after pouring so much of his heart into the song. He didn't look up. He didn't trust his voice enough to speak. The room felt too quiet now, too hollow without the music filling it. The door to the booth opened softly and Keanu stepped inside. He approached slowly, not wanting to overwhelm him. Samuel kept his eyes down, tears slipping freely down his cheeks despite his efforts to contain them. His chest rose and fell in uneven breaths, the emotional weight of the moment settling deep within him. Keanu placed a gentle hand on Samuel's shoulder. The touch was steady, warm, and grounding. Samuel tensed at first, then allowed himself to breathe a little easier. "That was beautiful," Keanu said quietly. "Every note, every word." Samuel shook his head, wiping his face with the back of his hand. I don't know what happened. I wasn't trying to sound good. You sang the way you loved her," Keanu said, "and your wife would be proud." Samuel's breath caught, and for a moment he couldn't speak at all. Hearing her mentioned with such sincerity reopened something tender inside him. He covered his eyes with his hand, overwhelmed, letting the tears come rather than fight them. Keanu stayed beside him, steady as a pillar, giving him the space to feel everything without shame. The small recording booth felt less like a studio now, and more like a place where grief and love had finally found their voice. And Samuel understood that he hadn't just recorded a song, he had honored Angela. The studio lights were dimmed now, the equipment powered down except for a single monitor that still displayed the waveform of Samuel's recording. The room felt calm, almost sacred, as if it understood something meaningful had just taken place within its walls. Samuel sat quietly on the stool inside the booth, his breathing finally slowing, though his eyes were still red from the tears he had tried to hide. Keanu stayed beside him, never rushing him, never pushing him to move before he was ready. After a few long moments of silence, Samuel finally whispered, "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Keanu replied. "What you did in here said more than enough." Samuel let the words settle, looking down at his hands. He still wasn't sure how to process everything. He had walked into this studio terrified of what might come out, and now he was leaving with a piece of himself captured forever in a way he had never imagined. They stepped out of the booth together, and Tyler approached with a quiet respect that mirrored Keanu's. He didn't offer flattery or praise. He didn't rush to congratulate the moment. He simply nodded at Samuel, the kind of nod a person gives when they recognize something genuine. "That was special," Tyler said. "Really special." Samuel tried to smile, but emotion tugged too hard at him. He looked away quickly, grateful but overwhelmed. The idea that anyone outside his late wife might find meaning in his voice felt unreal. Keanu placed a hand lightly on Samuel's back. "Let's take a breath," he said. one step at a time. They moved toward the small lounge outside the studio booth. The room had soft lighting, comfortable chairs, and the faint scent of coffee lingering from earlier in the day. Samuel sat down slowly as though still unsure his legs could hold him. Keanu pulled a chair beside him. For a moment they sat in a quiet that wasn't heavy this time. It was reflective, gentle, the afterglow of something deeply honest. When Samuel finally looked up, Keanu spoke with careful intention. "I want to ask you something," he said, "but only if you feel okay talking right now." Samuel nodded. "I'm all right. What is it?" Keanu took a small breath. "I'd like your permission to send your recording to a show called Hidden Voices of America. It highlights everyday people with incredible talent, people who never had the platform or the chance." Samuel blinked, stunned. He wasn't expecting anything like that. "Me? Why would they want to hear me? Because your voice deserves to be heard," Keanu said plainly. Samuel stared at him, torn between disbelief and fear. "Keanu, I'm nobody. I'm a janitor who sang to his wife. I don't fit into anything like that." "You're not nobody," Keanu said. "And you don't have to fit into anything. The show exists for people exactly like you." Samuel shook his head, overwhelmed all over again. "I don't know. I don't want to be a spectacle. I don't want people thinking I'm trying to be something I'm not." "This isn't about trying to be anything," Keanu said. "It's about letting the world hear something that's honest." Samuel looked down, fiddling with his hands. "Even if I said yes, nothing would come of it," maybe Keanu said gently. "But maybe not." Samuel didn't respond right away, but after a long moment, he whispered, "If you really think it's worth sending, then yes, you can send it." Keanu nodded with quiet certainty, and the plan he had been holding quietly in his heart began to move. Later that night, after driving Samuel home and reassuring him that no decisions had to be made, beyond the small yes he had already given, Keanu returned to his hotel room with the recording file saved carefully on his tablet. He listened to it again in the quiet of the room, letting every note sink in. The honesty in Samuel's voice struck him just as deeply as it had in the studio. It wasn't polished, it wasn't theatrical, it was real. And real was rare. Keanu opened his laptop and typed Hidden Voices of America submission portal. The show had a reputation for finding extraordinary talent in ordinary places, featuring workers, caregivers, grandparents, mechanics, and small-town teachers whose voices carried stories no one ever told. It was the kind of show Keanu respected, the kind that didn't turn people into spectacles, but honored the truth in them. He uploaded the audio file, watching the progress bar fill slowly. Then he opened a blank message box and took a moment before typing. His note wasn't dramatic, it wasn't emotional. It was simple and human. He wrote that Samuel Brooks was a janitor at a local school, that he had never trained, that he wasn't chasing fame, that he sang for the memory of his late wife, that his voice came from devotion, not ambition. He emphasized that Samuel didn't ask to be discovered. He simply existed with a gift most people might never hear. Keanu signed the email without attaching anything that hinted at who he was. He didn't want the producers to say yes because of his name. He wanted them to say yes because of Samuel. When he pressed send, a quiet sense of purpose settled over him. 2 days later, the producers responded directly to Keanu's private email. They were stunned. They described Samuel's recording as one of the most authentic submissions they had ever received. They asked if the man behind the voice would agree to appear on the show. Keanu wrote back and agreed to coordinate, making it clear he wanted no credit, no mention, no spotlight. This was Samuel's moment, not his. When Keanu called Samuel that evening, he spoke gently, easing him into the news. Samuel didn't believe it at first. He kept repeating that things like this didn't happen to people like him. But beneath the disbelief, a quiet flicker of hope began to glow, and Keanu knew exactly what he had to do next. 3 quiet weeks passed after the recording session, and life for Samuel returned to its familiar rhythm. He swept hallways, he emptied trash bins, he mopped classrooms long after students went home. And each night, he returned to a small apartment still filled with echoes of Angela's presence. He tried not to expect anything. He tried not to hope. Keanu's kindness had been real, and the recording session was unforgettable, but Samuel convinced himself that nothing more would come of it. Then one morning, as he unlocked the custodial supply closet to begin his shift, he noticed an envelope on the floor. Someone had slid it under the door. It was thick, crisp, sealed with an embossed logo he didn't immediately recognize. His name was printed neatly across the front. He picked it up slowly. His heart began to beat harder as he turned it over in his hands. When he saw the logo again, Hidden Voices of America, his breath caught. He tore the envelope open with trembling fingers. Inside was a formal letter printed on heavy paper, the kind of paper people used for things that mattered. At the top, the show's emblem was bold and unmistakable. His eyes began to race across the page, reading each sentence twice to make sure he wasn't imagining the words. They were inviting him to appear on the next taping. They were offering him a featured performance slot. They called his voice astonishingly authentic. They called his story deeply human. Samuel stared at the letter as if it might vanish if he blinked too hard. His hands shook so much he had to set it down on a cleaning cart before he dropped it entirely. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. The hallway around him blurred for a moment, and he rubbed his eyes, wondering if exhaustion had created some strange hallucination. "This has to be a mistake," he whispered. He folded the letter and unfolded it again, searching for any sign that it wasn't addressed to him. But his name was printed clearly. His address, his shift hours, everything was unmistakably real. Still overwhelmed, he hurried down the hallway toward the main office, clutching the letter like a fragile piece of glass. He approached the receptionist, a kind woman who had known him for years. "I'm sorry," Samuel said, breathless. "I need to ask, is someone playing a prank on me? A joke, maybe." She took the letter, read it carefully, and her eyes widened. "Samuel, this is real. This is really real." He leaned against the counter, dizzy from shock. Real felt too big, too impossible, too sudden for someone who had spent years believing that the world had moved on without him. "What am I supposed to do with this?" he whispered. "Why would they want me?" The receptionist placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Maybe because your voice deserves to be heard." Samuel didn't know how to respond. All he could do was nod weakly and walk out of the office in a daze, the letter still trembling in his hand. He didn't understand how this happened. He didn't know Keanu had been working quietly behind the scenes. He only knew that his life had just shifted and he wasn't ready. Samuel spent the rest of the day moving through his shift in a fog, the letter tucked carefully inside his pocket. Every few minutes, he pressed his hand against it, confirming it was still there. He swept the hallways. He cleaned the stairwells. But his mind kept circling back to the same impossible thought. A national show wanted him. Him. A man who had never sung for anyone except his wife, and by accident, a movie star who happened to walk by. That evening, Keanu met him in the small courtyard outside the school. Samuel approached slowly, clutching the folded letter in his trembling hands. The moment Keanu saw his face, he understood. "They wrote to you," Keanu said softly. Samuel nodded, unable to form words at first. He handed the letter over with shaking fingers. Keanu read it silently, then looked back at him with calm certainty. "This is real," Keanu said. "They want you." Samuel sank onto a nearby bench, wiping his forehead. "Keanu, I don't know what to do. I don't think I can do this. I'm not good enough. I'll embarrass myself on national television. People will wonder why a janitor is standing on a stage meant for real singers." "You are a real singer," Keanu said. "One of the most honest I've ever heard." Samuel looked down at his hands. "What if I fail? What if my voice cracks? What if I can't get through it without thinking of her?" Keanu sat beside him, leaving enough space so Samuel didn't feel crowded. "You're not failing anything. You're sharing something beautiful. And thinking of her isn't a weakness. It's the reason your voice has so much soul." Tears gathered again in Samuel's eyes. "It feels like singing without her. There means letting go of her. Like I'm stepping into a world she'll never see." Keanu shook his head gently. "You aren't losing her. You're carrying her with you. Every note, every breath, She's part of your voice, Samuel. She always will be. Samuel covered his mouth with his hand, overwhelmed by the truth in those words. Fear and love collided in his chest, tightening around his heart. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You are, Keanu said, and you won't be alone. I'll be with you every step of the way. Samuel finally let out a shaky breath. The fear was still there, but for the first time something steadier rose beside it. Trust. Fragile, but real. He looked at the letter again, the words no longer blurring. Okay, he whispered. If you believe I can do this, I'll try. And for the first time in a long time, Samuel felt the world opening instead of closing. The day arrived faster than Samuel expected. One moment, he was sweeping the hallways of the school, convincing himself nothing extraordinary would ever happen again. The next, he was stepping out of a taxi in front of a massive building lined with bright banners showing past performers of Hidden Voices of America. Everything felt unreal. The polished glass windows reflected a world he didn't feel ready for, a world he never believed had room for someone like him. A production assistant guided him inside, handing him a small visitor's badge with his name printed neatly across the front. Seeing his name on something official made his stomach twist. His palms grew slick. The air around him felt too sharp, too alive. He wiped his hands on his pants and followed the assistant down a long hallway, buzzing with crew members carrying equipment, adjusting lights, and speaking urgently through headsets. Just breathe, the assistant said kindly, sensing his nerves. Everyone's nervous their first time. Samuel nodded stiffly, though breathing felt like an impossible task. He held the edges of his jacket tightly as if the fabric could keep his heart from pounding out of his chest. He remembered mopping a quiet hallway just weeks earlier, lost in his grief. Now he was here about to stand on a stage in front of hundreds of strangers. They brought him backstage to a small waiting area lined with mirrors surrounded by bright bulbs. The lights felt too harsh, at first revealing every crease in his expression. He sat down slowly, staring at his reflection. The man in the mirror looked older than he felt inside, worn by loss and long nights of solitude. He wondered for a moment if he belonged here at all. Keanu arrived quietly through a side entrance, unnoticed by the production crew. He wore plain jeans, an old gray jacket, and a baseball cap pulled low over his brow. He wasn't here for attention. He wasn't here to steal a moment. He was here for one reason, Samuel. When he stepped into the waiting area, Samuel felt his breath catch again, but this time for a very different reason. You made it, Keanu said gently. Samuel managed a shaky smile. I'm trying. Keanu sat beside him, keeping his voice low and steady. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be honest. That's all anyone asks. Samuel looked back at his reflection, swallowing hard. I'm scared. More scared than I've ever been. That's good, Keanu said. It means this matters to you. A voice on the intercom called for the next performers to line up. The sound echoed through the hallway, tightening Samuel's chest. He gripped the arms of the chair to steady himself. The production assistant returned. Mr. Brooks. It's almost time. Samuel stood, though his legs trembled beneath him. Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. You're not alone. I'm right here. Just out of sight, but here. Samuel nodded, though fear still wrapped around him like a second skin. They walked together toward the stage entrance. The closer they got, the louder the sound of the audience became. Laughter, applause, shuffling feet. It felt like a tidal wave waiting for him on the other side of the curtain. He whispered softly in his mind, hoping she could somehow hear him. Angela, help me not disappoint you. The curtain handler lifted the corner of the heavy fabric. The lights spilled into the backstage hallway. Samuel took one fragile breath and stepped forward. As Samuel stepped into the wings of the stage, the brightness hit him like heat. The lights overhead were blinding, illuminating every corner of the platform where so many had stood before him. His breath caught as he stared out at the large studio audience. Every seat was filled. Cameras were positioned at angles he didn't understand. Judges sat at a long table near the front of the stage, their expressions attentive and curious. His knees threatened to buckle. Behind him, Keanu lingered in the shadows, hidden from everyone except a lighting tech who paid him no attention. His hands were clasped in front of him, his posture tense, steadying himself for Samuel's sake. He didn't move closer. He didn't speak. But Samuel felt him there, a quiet anchor at his back. A stage manager whispered, "When the host calls your name, walk to the center mark. The microphone will lower automatically." Samuel nodded, even though he barely absorbed the instructions. His heart hammered so loudly he feared people near him might hear it. The host stepped forward with the easy confidence of someone who lived in front of cameras. He lifted a card and spoke into the microphone. "Next, we have Samuel Brooks from Seattle." The audience applauded. The sound crashed over Samuel in a wave of pressure. He inhaled slowly, forcing his feet to carry him toward the center of the stage. Each step felt heavier than the last. When he reached the mark, the microphone descended, stopping perfectly at the height he needed. He stared at it, feeling as if he were staring at a doorway he wasn't sure he could enter. One of the judges smiled kindly. "Welcome, Samuel. Whenever you're ready." "Ready?" The word echoed inside him, sounding both impossible and necessary. He closed his eyes for a brief moment. His lips moved silently. "Angela, I hope I make you proud." When he opened his eyes, the lights blurred slightly from the tears he fought to contain. His hands trembled at his sides. His lungs tightened. For a second, he thought he might freeze completely, that fear would steal every note from his throat. Backstage, Keanu leaned forward, barely breathing, willing strength into him without making a sound. Samuel drew a slow breath deeper than the others. He lifted his chin just slightly. The room felt enormous, yet strangely intimate. It was as if all the noise faded into a hush, waiting for a truth only he could give. He parted his lips, but nothing came out. He swallowed hard, panic tightening around his chest. He tried again, forcing air through the fear. A faint note finally escaped, fragile, thin, trembling. He almost stopped right there, but then something else rose in him. Something familiar, something loved. He remembered the nights he sang in a dim kitchen while Angela leaned against the counter, smiling softly. He let that memory steady him. He tried again. This time, the note was stronger. The audience grew still, and Samuel knew there was no turning back now. The first steady note left Samuel's chest with a tremor of uncertainty, but the moment it reached the microphone, it settled into something fuller, something real, something that didn't ask for permission. It wasn't loud, it wasn't polished, but it carried the unmistakable weight of a man who had lived, loved, lost, and survived through all of it. The studio, which moments before buzzed with whispers and shifting feet, fell completely silent. The judges lifted their heads almost in unison. One of them, a woman known for her strict critiques, lowered the pen she had been holding, letting it rest softly against the table. The scribbles she intended to write never came. Instead, she leaned forward, eyes softening. The cameraman closest to the stage adjusted his grip, but did not move, afraid that even the quiet click of the lens might break the moment forming before him. Audience members, some with arms crossed, some seated, casually shifted unconsciously. Their posture straightened, their expressions softened. They listened. Samuel did not see any of this. His eyes remained closed, not from fear now, but from devotion. He was no longer standing on a stage in front of strangers. In his heart, he was back in his kitchen singing, while Angela washed dishes, smiling without saying a word, letting his voice fill the room like a warmth they both needed. As he reached the second verse, the tremble in his tone faded. What replaced it was something raw, pure emotion shaped into sound. Years of grief that had lived silently inside him now poured through the melody, turning the stage into a sanctuary he never expected to stand in. Backstage, Keanu watched from the shadows. His breath caught the same way it had in the tool room. He could feel the energy shift in the space, the kind of shift that only happened when truth was being offered without hesitation. Samuel's voice grew in strength, but it never forced itself. It carried longing, but not despair. It carried memory, but not regret. It carried love, the kind that lingers long after a person is gone. Each note reached out into the audience, touching hearts in ways Samuel would never fully understand. In the front row, an older woman pressed a hand to her mouth, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. A young man who had been scrolling through his phone earlier now held it still in his lap, staring at Samuel with silent respect. Even the host, who had prepared a few light-hearted comments for after the performance, forgot every word. By the time Samuel reached the chorus, something extraordinary had happened. The room wasn't just listening, it was feeling. The melody wrapped itself around old wounds, memories of lost parents, childhood homes, partners who never returned. Each listener felt a piece of themselves in Samuel's voice, as if he were singing their stories as much as his own. Samuel didn't know any of this. He simply sang the way he had always sung for Angela, with honesty, with tenderness, with the kind of love that asked for nothing in return. And the room held its breath. Samuel reached the quietest part of the song, the section where the melody softened into a whisper. His voice dipped into a gentle tremor, not from nervousness now, but from emotion, rising too quickly for him to contain. He let it rise anyway. He let it fill him, guide him, steady him. The microphone caught every nuance, every breath, every subtle ache that carried the memory of the woman he once sang to every night. In the control booth, an audio technician who had worked on hundreds of performances paused with his hand hovering over a dial. He didn't dare adjust anything. The sound coming through the monitors wasn't something he wanted to polish. It was already perfect in a way that had nothing to do with mixing or engineering. It was perfect because it was human. As the song built toward its emotional peak, Samuel opened his eyes. He didn't focus on the audience. He didn't look at the cameras. His gaze lifted slightly, landing somewhere above the lights, as though searching for a presence he could not see but could still feel. Angela. He felt her there, not as a memory, not as a ghost, but as a warmth inside him that steadied his hands and loosened his throat. His chest expanded with a long breath, and the next note he released was strong enough to make the entire room feel alive. Several audience members wiped their eyes. A man in the third row lowered his head, overwhelmed. One of the judges placed a hand over her heart, visibly moved. Another judge leaned back, slowly stunned into stillness. Backstage. Keanu felt a tightness in his throat he hadn't expected. He had believed in Samuel from the moment he heard that first voice echo through the school hallway. But hearing it now, here on a stage, meant for the extraordinary, made him realize something even deeper. Samuel wasn't just talented, he was unforgettable. Samuel approached the final lines of the song. His voice softened again, trembling gently as though he were offering a final message to someone he loved. His hands shook at his sides, and his shoulders rose and fell with every breath. Tears slipped down one cheek, but he didn't lift a hand to wipe them away. He let them fall, letting the grief and love blend into the last note. When he released it, the entire studio felt suspended in time. The note stretched softly, then faded into a stillness so complete that even the sound operators didn't exhale. Samuel closed his eyes, lowering his head, as though offering the ending directly to Angela. He didn't wait for applause. He didn't expect it. He simply breathed out a final quiet word only he could hear. "Thank you." The silence lasted one heartbeat, then another. Then the room erupted. The applause hit him like a wave, loud, rising, unstoppable. People stood, cameras tilted, judges clapped with both hands. Some shouted his name. The sound swallowed the stage in a warmth he had never experienced before. Samuel's shoulders trembled, tears blurred his vision. And backstage, still hidden in the shadows, Keanu Reeves smiled. Samuel had just changed his own life. The applause shook the room long after Samuel lowered his head, unable to fully absorb what was happening around him. It rose like a tidal wave, not the polite clapping of an entertained audience, but the full-bodied sound of people who had been moved somewhere deep within themselves. Samuel opened his eyes slowly, breath trembling, as he looked out at the sea of faces standing for him, some wiping tears, some holding their hands over their hearts, all of them connected by something they didn't expect to feel tonight. The host stepped forward, giving the room a moment to settle, though the energy still pulsed like a heartbeat. "Samuel Brooks," he said warmly, "you've just left us all speechless." Samuel swallowed hard. His throat felt tight, thick with emotion he could no longer hide. He wiped the corner of his eye quickly, though more tears threatened to fall. The judges exchanged glances, each one visibly moved. The first judge to speak was the woman known for her sharp critiques, someone not easily impressed. Tonight, however, her voice wavered before she found her footing. "Samuel," she said, leaning slightly forward, "I've heard thousands of voices in my career. Technically perfect voices, voices trained by the best teachers in the world. But what you just did—" She paused, pressing a hand gently against her chest. "That was the most genuine voice I've ever heard. You weren't singing notes. You were singing truth." Samuel's breath hitched. No one had ever spoken about his voice with such sincerity. He looked down, overwhelmed, unsure how to receive such words. The second judge, a composer who had spent decades shaping music for films and orchestras, cleared his throat softly. "There is something in your tone that cannot be taught," he said. "It comes from lived experience, real experience. From love, from pain, from holding on when everything in you wanted to fall apart." He pointed toward him gently. "Your voice carries life, and that is more powerful than any training." Samuel blinked hard, tears spilling despite his attempt to control them. His fingers curled slightly at his sides. He wasn't used to praise. He wasn't used to being seen. And now 3 strangers were speaking to him as if he had given the world something precious. The third judge, a former singer herself, took a moment before speaking. Her eyes glistened as she tried to steady her voice. "Music exists for one reason," she said, "to remind us we are human, to remind us of the people we've loved and lost. Tonight you reminded me why music matters. You reminded me what it feels like to feel something all the way through." She offered him a warm, emotional smile. "Thank you for that gift." The audience applauded again, a softer but deeper sound now, like an exhale, shared by everyone in the room. Samuel tried to breathe through the emotion rising in him, but the tears kept coming. He didn't bother wiping them away this time. He let them fall, because they weren't just tears of grief anymore. They were tears of release, tears of being understood, tears of feeling for the first time in months that he had done something meaningful, something that mattered to someone other than himself. He closed his eyes briefly. "Angela, I hope you hear this." The host stepped toward Samuel again, giving him a moment to steady himself before speaking. "Samuel," he said softly, aware of how fragile the moment was. "The judges are clearly moved. And I think everyone here would agree, you've given us something rare tonight." Samuel opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came. His voice trembled too much to form a reply. He pressed a hand lightly against his chest, trying to calm the storm of emotion swirling inside him. The audience seemed to understand. They stayed quiet, not impatient but reverent. Finally, Samuel managed a whisper. "Thank you," he said. "I don't know what else to say except thank you." His words were simple, but they carried the sincerity of someone who had never expected to stand in a moment like this. Someone who still couldn't fathom how a janitor from Seattle had ended up singing in front of hundreds of people on national television. The host smiled gently. "Would you like to share who you were singing to?" Samuel hesitated, inhaling slowly, his eyes drifting toward the lights above him. The breath he released trembled, but he didn't shy away from the question. "Not tonight. My wife," he said softly. "Angela." A ripple of emotion moved through the audience. Samuel continued, voice fragile but honest. "She passed away 6 months ago. I used to sing to her every night. It was our ritual, our way of ending the day. When she got sick, I kept singing because I didn't know what else to do. After she was gone, singing was the only way I could still feel close to her." The audience murmured gently in empathy. The judge's eyes softened further. And backstage, hidden from view, Keanu exhaled quietly, feeling the weight of Samuel's truth settle into the room. Samuel continued deeper now into the memory he had carried alone. I never thought my voice meant anything. It was just something I did for her. For us. His lips trembled. Tonight was the first time I felt like maybe it meant something to someone else. One of the judges leaned forward, speaking softly so the moment wouldn't break. It did. It meant something to everyone in this room. The audience erupted again, not in loud applause this time, but in a powerful wave of emotional support. People stood slowly, deliberately giving him a second standing ovation. This one gentler, more intimate, shaped by compassion rather than astonishment. Samuel looked out at them, and something inside him shifted. For months, he had wandered through days feeling invisible, broken, unsure if anything in him still held value. But now, standing on a stage he never imagined touching, he felt a small but unmistakable truth settle in his heart. He had done something meaningful. He had honored Angela. He had touched lives. And for the first time since losing her, he felt that she might be smiling somewhere in the spaces he could not see. When the ovation finally faded, Samuel bowed his head once more, overwhelmed but grateful. The lights, the faces, the gratitude, it was all more than he could ever have dreamed. And backstage, Keanu allowed himself a quiet smile. Samuel had not only sung his love story, he had shared it with the world. The applause finally settled into a warm, lingering hush as Samuel stood in the soft glow of the stage lights, still breathing unevenly. His heart felt too full, his mind unable to keep pace with everything happening around him. Moments ago, he had been a janitor who doubted his worth. Now, hundreds of strangers stood for him, honoring the truth he'd carried quietly for years. The host stepped forward again, sensing that the emotion of the moment had not yet finished unfolding. Samuel, he said gently, you've moved everyone here tonight. And I think there's one question we're all wondering. Samuel looked up, blinking away the remaining tears. How did you end up here? The host asked. Who helped you reach this stage? The question struck Samuel in a way he hadn't expected. He froze for a moment. The audience leaned in. The judges waited. Even the crew members backstage paused, sensing the importance behind the inquiry. Samuel didn't answer immediately. His eyes drifted toward the corner of the stage, toward the dark wings where he knew someone was standing just out of sight. Someone who had given him more than encouragement. Someone who had quietly changed the entire direction of his life. He inhaled, slowly steadying himself, and then spoke, with a voice still soft from emotion. Someone believed in me when I had nothing left but a mop and a broken heart. A ripple moved through the audience. It wasn't a dramatic line, there was no intention to impress, but it carried a truth that struck everyone who heard it. The host raised an eyebrow, stepping closer out of curiosity. That's beautifully said, Samuel. But who is this person? Samuel hesitated again, his eyes flicking instinctively toward the wings. Behind the curtains, Keanu stood exactly where he had promised he would be quiet, still unseen. His hands rested loosely at his sides. His gaze never left the man on stage. His posture carried no hint of ownership or expectation. He hadn't come for applause, and certainly not for recognition. But hearing Samuel speak those words, it hit him harder than he expected. His eyes glistened in the dim backstage lighting, though he blinked quickly to steady himself. On stage, Samuel swallowed and shook his head. I can't say, he answered softly. The host looked surprised. You can't say, or you don't want to say? Samuel managed a faint, sincere smile. I won't say. He didn't help me to get credit. He helped me because he saw something in me when I couldn't see it in myself. Some gifts should stay quiet. The judges exchanged intrigued glances. The audience murmured with curiosity. The cameras panned automatically toward the backstage area, searching for movement, for a hint, for any clue that might reveal the identity of the mysterious person Samuel was protecting. But Keanu remained still, stepping back just slightly so the shadows swallowed him further. He didn't want even the possibility of being seen. This was Samuel's night, not his. The host seemed even more intrigued by Samuel's refusal. He stepped a little closer, microphone in hand, carefully navigating the emotional balance of the moment. "Whoever this person is," he said, "they clearly changed your life. And I think the audience would love to thank them too." Samuel's expression softened, but he shook his head gently. "If I said his name," he replied, "I'd be taking something from him. He doesn't want the spotlight. He doesn't want praise. He didn't do this for applause. He did it because he believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." A quiet murmur filled the room again, this time touched with respect rather than curiosity. There was something powerful about a man who chose not to reveal the person responsible for the greatest turning point of his life. Something honorable, something deeply human. Backstage, Keanu's eyes lowered to the floor for a moment. A subtle breath escaped him, not of relief, but of gratitude. He never wanted to be named. He never wanted to distract from Samuel's voice or his story, but hearing Samuel describe him with such sincerity stirred something in his heart. Samuel didn't owe him anything, not a mention, not gratitude, not loyalty, but he still protected Keanu's privacy with quiet dignity. On stage, the host tried one last time. "Are you sure you don't want to tell us who he is?" Samuel smiled through lingering tears. "If he wanted to be seen, he said he would be standing next to me right now. He's where he needs to be, and I'm where he helped me stand." The audience erupted into applause again, this time directed at Samuel's humility as much as his voice. Several people stood for a third ovation, moved by the way he carried both gratitude and respect without asking for anything in return. Behind the curtain, Keanu finally allowed himself to lean against the wall. His shoulders relaxed as the applause washed through the backstage area. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the moment settle. This was everything he had hoped for. Not fame, not recognition, but the quiet rise of someone who deserved a chance at the life he had forgotten to dream about. Tyler. The sound engineer from the studio was also backstage helping with equipment. He recognized Keanu and approached him quietly. "You did something good," he whispered. Keanu shook his head gently. "He did something good. I just opened a door." The applause continued, rolling like a warm tide through the studio. Samuel stood in its glow, trembling but proud, knowing he had honored Angela, honored himself, and honored the man who believed in him enough to make all of this possible without ever asking to be seen. He glanced once more toward the wings, not expecting Keanu to step out, but wanting him to feel the gratitude being poured into the room. Keanu remained exactly where he was, unseen, but present, his eyes shining with quiet pride. Samuel didn't need him on stage. He only ever needed a chance. When Samuel's episode finally aired nationwide, he didn't expect anything special to happen. He sat alone in his small living room, wearing the same modest clothes he wore to work, holding a warm cup of tea between his hands. He kept the volume low, almost afraid to hear his own voice coming through the television. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the heater and the faint echo of his performance filling the space. He watched himself stand on that bright stage, watched his hands shake, watched the judges cry. He had lived the moment, but seeing it played back felt surreal, like watching someone else entirely. He didn't know that while he was watching quietly, the rest of the country was reacting very differently. Within the first hour of the broadcast, clips of his performance began circulating online. The video spread across social media platforms, shared first by viewers who had been touched by his voice, then by influencers, then by news outlets. People wrote heartfelt messages under the clip. "This man just broke my heart open. Who is he? His voice feels like healing. I haven't cried at a song in years. America needs to hear more from him." A music blogger reposted the clip with the title, "America's Hidden Tenor." A popular talk show host tweeted, "Move over professionals." A janitor from Seattle just reminded the country what soul sounds like. Someone else wrote, "The janitor with the golden voice." Another viewer offered a simpler but deeper line, "The man who made the nation cry tonight." The comments kept coming, thousands of them flooding the internet with praise for a man who didn't even own a smartphone capable of reading half the messages. Former students from the school where Samuel worked found the video and immediately recognized him. They posted clips of themselves sharing memories of the kind janitor who always encouraged them, who fixed broken desks without being asked, who quietly left, encouraging notes on bulletin boards and never took credit. He once stayed 2 hours after his shift to help me find my lost project. One student said, he called all of us kiddo. Like we mattered, another added. He always hummed while he cleaned. I never knew he sounded like this. Teachers joined in too, sharing stories of Samuel helping them move equipment, cheering up struggling students, and sweeping the hallways with a patience that made even routine work feel meaningful. Bit by bit, the world began to piece together who he was. Not a performer, not a celebrity, but a man who lived his life quietly, humbly, generously. And now, the world was finally seeing him. While the internet stirred with excitement, Samuel sat alone after the broadcast ended, turning off the television slowly. He didn't know how big the reaction was yet. He didn't know that millions of people were discovering his voice. His phone buzzed twice, then 10 times, then 20. Old friends he hadn't spoken to in years wrote messages asking if it was really him. Nieces and nephews sent selfies with tear-stained cheeks. Former coworkers congratulated him, overwhelmed with pride. Samuel leaned back in his chair, eyes stinging. For the first time since losing Angela, he felt something he hadn't dared to feel. He felt seen. While Samuel sat in his quiet apartment, absorbing the steady stream of messages, the rest of the country was still waking up to the depth of his story. News headlines began appearing across major websites. A voice that stopped America. Seattle janitor brings viewers to tears, the most emotional performance in Hidden Voices history. Morning shows played clips of his performance, with hosts wiping their eyes. Radio stations replayed the audio during morning commutes, telling listeners about the humble man who had sung his heart out for the love he lost. Even people who didn't normally watch talent shows were sharing the video with friends, saying, "You need to hear this, trust me." Meanwhile, Keanu watched all of it unfold from his home. He sat on his couch with a soft smile, sipping coffee while scrolling through article after article about Samuel. He didn't comment. He didn't post anything. He didn't reveal his involvement. Watching the world embrace Samuel was more than enough. He clicked play on the viral clip again. The moment the first note rose, Keanu felt the same stillness he had felt in the tool room that night. A sense that some voices were not meant to be hidden forever. Some voices were meant to remind people of what mattered. Messages continued flooding in for Samuel, and word began to reach his neighborhood as well. The woman who ran the corner store waved at him from behind the counter. The next afternoon, beaming with pride, the school's principal called him into the office just to hug him and tell him how much joy he had brought to the staff. Students gathered around him in the hallway, cheering and asking for selfies. But through it all, Samuel remained humble. Every compliment overwhelmed him. Every message made him feel grateful, but astonished. He had never imagined being seen this way. He had never imagined being heard beyond the walls of a mop room. One evening, overwhelmed by the noise of his suddenly busy phone, Samuel turned it off and sat in silence, resting his hands on his knees. He closed his eyes and whispered softly, "Angela, they're hearing me because of you." And in that quiet moment, he felt a warmth in his chest that eased his grief in a way nothing else had since she passed. Across town, Keanu continued reading comments from strangers who felt healed, inspired, or comforted by Samuel's voice. One comment in particular stayed with him. "If one person believes in you, everything can change." Keanu leaned back, letting those words settle. That was what this had always been about. Not fame, not exposure, not applause, just one person believing in another. Samuel had sung from love, and the country had heard it. Keanu closed the laptop gently, a quiet smile touching his face. Sometimes lifting one person really could touch millions. In the weeks that followed the viral broadcast, Samuel's life changed in ways he never expected and certainly never sought. Every morning when he woke up, his phone contained new messages, some from strangers who wanted to thank him, others from old friends who had rediscovered him after years of silence, and still others from community groups asking if he would consider performing at local events. He scrolled through each message slowly, sometimes reading the same note 3 or 4 times before he fully processed it. Every word of kindness felt surreal, like someone else's story had been attached to his name by mistake. But the messages were real. The invitations were real. And gradually, Samuel began to understand that the world was seeing him now in a way he had never seen himself. One day, he received a letter from a community center hosting a memorial gathering for families who had lost loved ones. They invited him to sing a few songs, not because he was famous now, but because they believed his voice carried a depth of comfort that people in grief needed to hear. Samuel stared at the letter for a long time. He felt a familiar tightness in his chest, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something gentler, something like purpose. He accepted. The night of the event, Samuel stood on a small stage in a modest room filled with rows of folding chairs. There were no bright lights, no cameras, no judges, just people who carried their own losses, each one holding a quiet heaviness in their eyes. Samuel took a breath, placed one hand lightly against his chest, and began to sing. His voice filled the room without need for amplification. It rose softly, wrapping around each person, with a warmth that had nothing to do with volume. He watched as people leaned forward, some closing their eyes, others wiping tears. And he realized something he hadn't fully understood. Before, his voice wasn't just a memory of Angela, it was a bridge for others to reach their own memories, their own healing. After the event, a woman approached him with trembling hands. "My husband passed away last year," she said softly. "I haven't been able to cry since the funeral. Tonight, I finally did. Thank you." Samuel didn't know how to respond. He simply held her hand gently, feeling the weight of her gratitude in the quiet between them. From that night on, he continued saying yes to small invitations, not because he wanted attention, but because he saw what his voice could do. He sang at charity vigils, community nights, grief circles, and small gatherings at local churches. He never charged money. He didn't seek recognition. He just sang, offering pieces of hope, one room at a time. In his spare moments, he returned to the small studio where he first recorded with Keanu. Tyler greeted him warmly each time, setting up the microphone, without fuss, letting Samuel record anything he felt ready to share. Some songs were for Angela, some were for others, some were for himself. He never recorded for fame, he recorded for healing. And every time he stepped into that booth, he felt a little lighter. Back at the art school where Samuel still worked part-time, things changed in quiet, meaningful ways. Students who once hurried past him with polite nods now stopped to greet him warmly. Some asked how he was feeling. Others shyly told him how proud they were of him. A few even asked for singing tips, blushing, when he laughed softly and reminded them he had never trained a day in his life. Teachers treated him differently too, not with exaggerated admiration, but with genuine respect. They invited him to staff gatherings. They checked on him during busy weeks. They asked him to share a few words during assemblies about perseverance and courage. And although Samuel felt awkward standing in front of large groups, he spoke with the same sincerity he carried in his music. One afternoon, the school organized a small ceremony in the lobby. Samuel was asked to come by, thinking it was a routine meeting. When he arrived, he found students, faculty, and staff gathered beneath a simple display covered with a cloth. The principal stepped forward, smiling warmly. "Samuel," she said, "this school has been home to many talented individuals, but you have shown us something rare: resilience, heart, and a reminder that brilliance can live quietly until the right moment." She lifted the cloth to reveal a small bronze plaque mounted on the wall. "In honor of Samuel Brooks, a voice of courage and hope." Samuel's breath caught. He stared at the plaque as if it were a dream he hadn't been meant to see. Students applauded, teachers wiped their eyes, and Samuel, overwhelmed, could only manage a whispered thank you. For the first time in his life, he felt himself standing taller, not because he wanted recognition, but because he finally believed he deserved to be where he was. Meanwhile, although Keanu kept his distance publicly, he remained a constant presence in Samuel's private world. Every week or so, Samuel received a text from him. How's your voice feeling this week? Any new songs in the studio? Proud of you, my friend. Sometimes they met quietly for coffee, in small, unremarkable shops where nobody paid them attention. They would talk not about fame or viral clips, but about life, about grief healing and finding meaning in unexpected places. Samuel often told Keanu he didn't know how to repay him. Each time, Keanu shook his head. "You already have," he said. "You gave the world honesty. That's more than enough." Their friendship was steady, unspoken, rooted in mutual respect. They didn't need pictures, posts, or public acknowledgments. They understood each other in a way that didn't require explanation. In time, Samuel began to feel something he hadn't felt since before Angela's illness. Not joy, exactly, not excitement, something quieter, something closer to peace. He had found a new way to carry his love forward. He had found a place where his voice could live. He had found purpose again. And though the world now saw him as a symbol of second chances, Samuel knew the truth was simpler. He had been given a chance because one person listened, and he used that chance to help others feel less alone. The night was cool and quiet as Keanu walked along a nearly empty street in Seattle, the city lights reflecting across the damp pavement. It was late enough that most shops had already closed, and the sidewalks felt calm, washed clean of the usual noise that filled them during the day. Keanu kept his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, his steps slow and thoughtful. He had just finished watching a clip of Samuel's latest performance online, a small community concert recorded on someone's phone, already spreading across social media because of the raw sincerity in Samuel's voice. Keanu replayed the sound of it in his mind as he walked. That same warmth, that same trembling honesty, that same mixture of love and sorrow that had first stopped him in the hallway of the art school. Hearing Samuel sing now felt different, though. It wasn't the sound of a man singing alone in a dark room anymore. It was the sound of a man who had rediscovered the meaning behind his voice. Keanu took a breath, letting the night breeze settle against him. He thought about how easily Samuel could have remained unseen, how easily that voice, that grief, that depth of emotion could have stayed trapped between mop buckets and concrete walls. All it took to change everything was a moment of pausing, of listening, of choosing not to walk past the sound of someone crying out without words. He reflected on how many people he had met in his life who carried their own hidden music. People who struggled quietly, people who had stories written in the lines around their eyes, but no one to read them. People who might never know what they were capable of because no one had ever told them they mattered. The thought weighed on him not with sadness, but with a deep sense of responsibility. Every life holds a story. Every heart carries a song. Most people simply need someone to say, "I see you." Keanu stopped at a crosswalk, watching a delivery truck pass by its headlights, washing briefly over him. He remembered standing in the recording studio, listening to Samuel pour his whole soul into a single song. He remembered the trembling in Samuel's hands when he finished. He remembered the look on his face when he realized he wasn't singing into emptiness anymore, but into a world ready to receive what he had to give. It struck Keanu just how powerful the transformation had been. Not the fame, not the viral moment, not the invitations or applause. The real transformation happened in Samuel's eyes the moment he realized he still had something meaningful left to offer. That realization had pushed back against grief in a way that nothing else could. Keanu continued walking, letting the memory of that moment warm him against the cold night air. Samuel's voice had touched millions, but Keanu knew the truth behind it. The voice people heard was shaped not by training or ambition, but by a love so deep it refused to fade, even after death. It was proof that grief, when shared, could become something beautiful, something healing, something that reached far beyond the person who carried it. And that, Keanu thought, is the quiet miracle of kindness. You never truly know how far it will travel. He reached the end of the block and paused again, looking up at the sky, as if Angela herself might be listening somewhere above. He hoped she felt proud not just of Samuel's voice, but of the courage it took for him to step into the world again. The city hummed softly around him, but Keanu felt a sense of peace settle inside his chest. What happened to Samuel was not magic. It was not luck. It was simply one human being choosing to believe in another at the right moment. And that choice had changed everything. Keanu kept walking until he reached a quiet overlook where the city stretched beneath him in soft waves of yellow and blue light. He stood there for a moment, letting the calm settle around him. His thoughts drifted back to Samuel's journey from the dimly lit tool room to a stage that held the attention of an entire nation. It amazed him how fragile that turning point had been. One missed step, one moment of impatience, one decision to keep walking. Any of those could have erased everything that came after. He wondered how many other people in the world were living with gifts they no longer believed in. How many carried grief like a stone in their chest, thinking their story had ended when someone they loved slipped away. Samuel had believed that, yet the world hadn't seen a broken man when he sang. It had seen someone who understood love deeply enough to express it even through loss. Keanu breathed in slowly, letting the night air fill his lungs. He knew that healing rarely arrived all at once. It came in small gestures, quiet encouragements, gentle reminders that pain did not erase value. Samuel had found healing not because someone handed him success, but because someone reminded him that his voice still mattered. Keanu hoped the people watching this story would carry that lesson with them, that they would look differently at the people in their own lives, that they would pause when they heard someone speak through sorrow, that they would choose kindness even when they didn't fully understand what another person was carrying. He stepped away from the overlook and began walking again, his pace steady, his mind peaceful. The night wrapped around him like a soft blanket, and somewhere inside that stillness, he felt the same quiet truth that had guided him since the moment he first heard Samuel sing. Sometimes, the greatest change begins with a single act of belief. Before the video fades out, two simple questions appear for the viewers to reflect on. Have you ever met someone whose kindness changed the direction of your life? What story would you like to see Keanu Reeves in next?